I'm not, I don't,
I'm an expert.
Okay.
am I being, okay.
Yeah, it's the, no,
There it is.
Okay, I'd like to call this Planning Commission public meeting to order at 7 p.m. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I think we have some different faces tonight. The role of the Planning Commission is to hold workshops to review and make recommendations to the City Council on all manner of policy and legislative activities. In some cases, we act as a quasi-judicial board for land use cases, which can then be appealed to either the council, the hearings examiner, or a court. Can we have the roll call, please?
Tal Jensen,
Here I am.
Sharon Watts,
Present?
Connie Taylor,
Present.
June Jones,
Present.
Frank Occupant.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is public comment. Any member of the public who wishes to give testimony for items that are not on the agenda, please come up to the podium. So, all right, seeing no takers, we will go on to approving the agenda. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Seconded.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, then we have the approval of the minutes from September 20th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second?
I'll second that.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes for September 20th. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Okay, so now we are going to our workshop on the comprehensive plan update. Travis.
Okay, thank you. So, there's a couple things I wanted to point out before we get started here. So, actually, what we have behind me, at some point before you leave tonight, if you want to take a look at this, as we go forward and I start doing open houses because of these kind of 6 scenarios, what I figured I would do is, in this room, I would set up 6 individual stations, one for each scenario, and it will include a full-size map so people can see in detail what that entails. Then I will create a graph of what the potential implications for population change would be. And then underneath that is kind of a list of the potential projects or what I've estimated seems like a logical growth scenario under that scenario. And for the individual applications that are being considered. And then down below is kind of what it means for the population, kind of the number side. So if your number is wrong, you can actually look down and figure out, okay, why does the population change at a certain point? Because I've estimated, okay, a project will be built out and maybe some apartments come in at a certain point. That's why some years are big jumps and some years are small jumps. Because if we run out of multifamily, then we won't have any more multifamily growth during that year. So it kind of helps them understand of what are some of the assumptions in a possible growth scenario, what it means for numbers for those. So how the open house would work is I'd have those stations and I'd probably put them along this wall and around the back so that people who come in can work their way at their own pace through the scenarios. By the time they come out that side, I'll have some tables set up so they can fill out some comments, they can do a survey, and they can ask me questions kind of once they've had a chance to wander through and take a look at what the scenarios mean. So that's how I envision the open houses working. So that's why that's back there. So if you want to take a look at that before you go, that would be great. So what I will do is I will walk you through tonight. Tonight's just a workshop, so it's just going to be a conversation about the scenarios so that you're okay with them before I take them out to the full public comment. So the first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to walk through kind of the growth implications and look at them in graph terms. So the first graph that I have here, the first line on this graph is the way the comprehensive plan was written is it assumes a given growth rate, and for each individual year, it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. As the packet that I gave you, it makes the assumption that there's enough land to just consistently grow at a rate. So lacking better information, it's a logical way to grow. The problem I had is that's not how it works. So if a 30-lot subdivision, I expect actually a 36-lot subdivision to come in later on this year, which means that we're likely to have 36 homes built next year. But if there are no more additional lots, so to me it makes more sense for me to look at the number of houses that are built, because you have to build dwellings in order for people to move to town and for the population to go up. So just assuming that 200 people are going to appear out of nowhere and live in the city is not the best way for me to manage from the planning point of view. But that's the way the comprehensive plan is set up this time. So what I've done is in all of these scenarios, the red line represents the comprehensive plan line that we were looking at, but if I were to use the housing numbers, and if we were to build, say, 49 housing units per year, that's actually what the blue line represents, and it's actually higher by using the average number of houses that are built than actually just using a blank population growth scenario. So
And that's just based on your projections, based on,
yes, yes,
Thank you.
an average year. So rather than 2.3% of housing, I estimated an additional 50 housing units per year, which means 2.3, 2.9 people per household. It's
Right.
50.
I saw that.
It's a slightly bigger number.
So is that, it's hard to tell. Is that linear or is that exponential? Is
Yes,
it-
so at this point, it's linear.
So it's growing by the same number, not the same percentage.
Yes, same number of housing units projected over an amount of time. So that's why there's a difference between the two. But you're getting exactly at where we're going next, because scenario one, as you remember from last month, basically we are not going to make any changes to our comprehensive plan or the map at all. And so that gold line, what it represents is we have about 3 or 4 more years of growth with the existing vacant residential land we have within the city. And then it gets to a certain point where it's just going to flatten out because we're not going to have any more land to build houses on. Therefore, we're not going to have any more population growth. So that's scenario one. Now this one is scenario two. And it involves the internal to the city. There are 3 potential changes to residential development. So even if we were to only entertain the within the city boundary comprehensive plan changes, we're going to go till about 2027, at which point we would run out of land to develop residentially, and then we'd be in the same position that we're in now. So it provides us a little longer of breathing room without having to readdress this issue. But so you see why I'm doing it this way is it's starting to get more and more complex as the different scenarios get added on. But what this clearly shows is that we won't be able to implement our comprehensive plan without changing our building growth boundary, unless we make some significant changes to zoning prior to development.
So this assumes no infill, just developing.
So it does involve some infill, and we can get to that. Okay. Now scenario 3 is a little more complicated, and because it involves looking at the 8 applications that have been submitted, or the 8 potential applications, and having to figure out which ones we want to accommodate, which ones make the most sense to approve, and trying to figure out, which ones don't make sense and which ones shouldn't be included in the urban growth area. And so, because it's going to involve some judgment on each one of those, so for scenario 3, and you'll see in the numbers that I gave you, there's a high scenario, which is this top line here. That's assuming a higher rate of growth. There's a medium scenario, so this assumes 150 units are built a year. This assumes 75 units would be built a year, single-family residential units. And this one assumes 50 residential units per year. And that's for single-family residential. It doesn't include it includes total multifamily, but that number that I gave you, the 50 to 75, is single-family dwelling. And that'll make sense as we get to some of the later numbers. So these lower ones all represent, so again, this represents the comp plan projection. This slightly higher number represents projections based upon housing increases, infill, and development phase for option 1, option 2, and option 3 is actually represented by 3 different numbers. So going to scenario 4, scenario 4 is assuming that you're not going to have to make decisions between winners and losers, that all of them that have applied are going to be considered for urban growth area inclusion. So it takes some of the guesswork out. But what we start to see here is once we get out beyond 2025, future growth in the city is likely to get larger, or the city is likely to get larger because of growth, because we now have a surplus of land that market forces will determine whether or not we're going to have more growth than we expect. So scenario 5 actually is the same as scenario 4 for a couple reasons. One is, and to refresh your memory, scenario 5, which is actually the one I have up on the wall back here, it includes filling in all of the Swiss cheese holes south of town, because at some point we need to be planning for them in case they ever decide to develop, and it's a lot more logical for us to be planning for the entire neighborhood rather than just the few properties down there that are huge, but represent only a smaller portion of the number of homeowners or property owners down there. So at some point, some of those property owners who are not currently applicants, but they may decide in the future that they want to do infill projects, and we need to make sure we've adequately sized utilities and infrastructure in place for them to be included. So they are slightly larger as we get out in the future, just simply because there's going to be more land available. Now, scenario 6 is actually the exact same as scenario 5 and 4, because to refresh your memory, scenario 6 is the entire bottoms in our urban growth boundary, and I made the assumption that yes, even if we go from the railroad tracks out to the Columbia River, the chances of anybody out there actually wanting to develop in the next 20 years and install the utilities it takes to get out there. So I assumed no growth, no additional growth under scenario 6, even though we have the opportunity to influence decisions out there. I'm assuming no growth.
Okay, so for clarification purposes, when I was looking through the Loomis and the 56 acres and you had 0, but then you had single-family resident, that's what you're talking about.
Okay.
Is that?
So the Loomis application is a great example, because right now, to get to the Loomis property, you have to go, so for anybody who's not familiar, that's this parcel up here. But to actually get there, you have to go out up Green Mountain Road and work your way through the county to get to it from the top side. So it's not necessarily the most logical development pattern. And at this point, the reason why they have applied is because they've drilled several wells in those properties. And from what I understand, 5 of the last 8 drilling have resulted in dry wells. So they have legal lots of record that don't have water available to them. So primarily, they're hoping to get in line so that they can run a small water line up the hill, but they're not necessarily prepared at this point to install a 6 or an 8-inch minimum water and sewer line to be annexed to the city and fully develop that property. Whereas if they're in the urban growth boundary, they might be able to work out a deal to run a 1 or a 2-inch line up there and serve their homes. But it doesn't give them much development opportunity unless they're prepared to spend the mega millions to install water, sewer, and city standard roads on the property. So it presents special challenges, which is, going to be part of the question if we end up like in scenario 3 where you pick some winners and losers. That's the kind of conversation we'll have to have for those individual properties, because they're probably in a totally different situation than the other applicants. So,
Thank you.
so does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay. So the other thing that I wanted to throw in here is I've included a historical population projection. And the reason why this one is important is if we get back to this line here, represents the historic or the comprehensive plan projection. And when you look back since 1970, and there were some big jumps decade-wise, there was like a huge jump of 110% in the 30s, and in the 50s there was some 30%, then 60s, very little growth, 70s, and then from the 70s to the 80s there was a 44% growth. That's what you're starting to see here, and that is you'll have a decade of big growth, and then it seems like a decade of slow growth, and there's, in this case, 2 decades of quick growth, and then the last 5 years have been a relatively slow growth because there's not a lot of land left to develop. And so when you start looking at these numbers and you think, wow, that seems like we're just taking off, the reality is when you look back over the long run, our comprehensive plan projection might actually be slower than historical growth over the long run. So although these numbers look extremely intimidating, it's entirely possible if we were to run a line up through here that the middle projection is actually pretty consistent with growth from the past. So, and the reason why I wanted to throw that in there is because these growth projections, when I get out into the community and I'm talking about them, people are going to say, yeah, we should not grow at all. And I've already received that comment several times, but it seems inconsistent with our kind of fits and starts. And if I'm not planning for some of that growth, realistically, 12,000 would be consistent with historical growth. So if I'm not planning for 12,000 and I'm planning for the 9,000 that our comprehensive plan calls for, it might be a little conservative, and we might find ourselves behind the eight ball, which is why we're here talking about tonight. So, any questions about kind of these graphs? So these represent what will be up at each individual station as they move around the room to help them understand what that growth scenario looks like in terms of our historical trends. So, okay, so I have a couple documents that I've given you, and let me go through those really quickly to give you an idea of where this information is coming from. So with scenario, actually the first thing we have is a population projection, and this is how the state and how the comprehensive plan previously looked at things. and that is they take the population from 2015, which is when we updated the comprehensive plan. They added 2.3%, and that's what the number that they expect to have each individual year. So it's very linear and structured. What I've added here is using the growth that we've had between 2015 and 2018. Population has actually been growing by almost 2.7%, not 2.3%. So that's what those first two lines represented, is a 2.3% growth rate and a 2.67% growth rate. That's why they're widening as we get farther out in the future. And then, of course, what the next section talks about is driven by the housing, the number that you get for housing. Let's use an example. So by 2021, the state expects our population to be 6643. But if I use our housing projections by how many building permits I expect, our population would be 6868. So the difference is an additional 225 people more than the comprehensive plan comes forward. Now, the reason why I did that is because we are already 62 people higher in today's population projections than what they expected in 2016 in the comprehensive plan. So in 2 years, we're already 30 people per year less or higher than our projected growth. So the last couple of years are 2.7% growth, not 2.3% growth. So that's what these numbers on these charts represent. So for scenario 1, so this is kind of the meat and potatoes. So again, here's the population projections of what the state thinks we're going to do and what our housing trend I expect it to do. So what I actually did is, and actually let's move to scenario 2, actually, because this one's a little easier to understand. So the first thing you'll see there is, if we are dealing with scenario 2, which means we're only going to make changes within our current growth area, we're dealing with 3 residential projects. The one is Saxony Pacific, that's this residential request here. Then there is the Young RV residential request here. And then the last one is the Woodland Commerce Center here. So again, we're only looking within the city, because that's scenario 2. And so what you have here is the project name. You have that it's within the city boundary, and it's approximately 5.52 acres, which means it'll equate to about 43 multifamily units. And the reason why I picked this number is because I've actually seen their first draft of what they're going to do, and they're looking at 43 multifamily or townhome units. So if this gets approved, my assumption is that they would start construction in 2019 and probably do half their projects in 2019, pull the rest of their building permits in 2020, and at the end of 2020 or the end of the building season 2020, they would be done. All 43 of those units would be built. So that's what is reflected in this number down here. So the graph and how I did this calculation down below is I expect single-family residential, I expect 36 units, because that's the number of units that's in the Quail Homes subdivision that's up at the north end of town by the intermediate school. And then I also know that there's going to be 8 duplex units next year, because their building permits are in the drawer, and Sequoia Park has 2 units, duplexes, that are left to be built on the Sequoia Park subdivision, which was approved a couple years ago. Now, down here is 3 and 4 units. I have don't know how I got 35, it should be 36 actually, so, oh, there might be a threeplex in there somewhere. But this accounts for the Sequoia Park subdivisions, and it also includes, oh, that's what it is. So what this note says is it's Sequoia Park plus 7 units of the Commerce Center. So I expect if this gets approved that the Commerce Center would start building some units next year. And then down below is 18 units, and that represents two 9-unit buildings on the Commerce Center site. So what I started to do is, if I can remind you, you go back up above, and I'm expecting Woodland Commerce Center to build some units in 2019 and 2020. That's what I'm showing down here on this graph down below. So I expect 18 units of multifamily. I expect 35 units of triplex or fourplex. I expect 8 units of duplexes. Plus I expect 36 single-family residential. So does that all make sense? That's why my numbers, looking at the building permits last fall, are significantly different from the 2.3% that the city estimates. Mine's based upon, best available information on the ground rather than just the straight flat projection. So again, if I go back to these graphs, that's why there's a significant jump in some of these years, because it assumes that if you approve some multifamily changes within the city, there's going to be a big jump because somebody might do 43 units of multifamily, and the state doesn't account for that. It just assumes that we're only going to build a set number of permits. So that's why these numbers start to diverge, why they have some years where it bumps up and then other years where it levels out, because I'm taking into account multifamily projects that we're trying to encourage, and the sooner we get them started, we'll see big bumps in the short term, but over the long run, it's going to grow to a level. So,
Can I ask, you
Sure.
said we're trying to encourage multifamily units. Where did that come from?
okay, so farther down on this page, one of the other things that's included in this calculation is a percentage of housing ratio
I understand the housing ratio.
that's laid out in the comprehensive plan.
Okay, and that's why you're saying we're trying to encourage it, because the comprehensive plan calls for that ratio?
Yes.
Okay,
And
so it's not a directive other than the comp plan?
No, yeah. And so, and it may be extremely relevant when you ultimately are talking about expanding the growth area with scenario 3, and that is you might be more receptive to projects that have both multifamily and single family because it's consistent with the comp plan. Whereas if you're looking at a project that's only multifamily and it's 2,000 units of multifamily, your interpretation might be that that's inconsistent with the comprehensive plan and it takes us too far in the multifamily direction, or it doesn't take us far enough into this balanced approach. So, but that's what this number, these last couple numbers here, is so that you can kind of, based upon my best available guessing, whether or not we're implementing that comprehensive plan philosophy. And so,
Well, your
again,
growth figures are higher for multifamily. You have projections of 100 units
Yes, yes.
in multiple years and 74, so you're projecting higher multifamily growth than single family.
Yes. So, and that's exactly right, because our comprehensive plan in 2015 said we expected about 671 single-family, low-density, and 619 multifamily. So what I did is, as I used my best judgment up here, I subtracted it from our goal down below. And so these two numbers here represent, at some point, if we expected 673 single-family units, at some point we're going to exceed that number, which means we need to update our comprehensive plan or figure out whether at some point we're going to start encouraging more multifamily to balance it out, or maybe as you look at this number, because in the end, you eventually get, like 67.33%, whereas right now we're at 78.21. So we're getting closer, but maybe we just haven't given ourselves enough time to bring those two numbers together.
Well, and you're counting Sequoia Park as single-family residential?
No.
You're calling, even though it is.
Multifamily. and
Even though it is
duplexes.
single-family residential, you're calling it multifamily?
So
Because
by-
of the density,
So
or?
by definition of the building code.
Mhm.
uh,
But of the ordinance, it's
single-
single-family residential.
Single-family and duplexes are 1 or 2 unit buildings.
Right. Mhm.
And Sequoia Park has many 4 units, which are
Mhm.
technically fall into the multifamily.
Mhm.
Now.
So are you dividing it out appropriately?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's why the numbers here represent, the 3 and 4 represent Sequoia Park.
Mhm.
And then these duplexes also represent Sequoia Park. They're just different products.
So are there any single-family residential out of Sequoia Park? Are you counting any?
The duplexes are considered single family.
So even though you're calling them duplexes, they're rolling over into the single-family classification?
Yes. And the reason why I did that is, actually, going back to this one. The reason why I did that is, sorry, I skipped this part, it's a really important part. If I'm going to start using housing numbers.
Okay, you're using the density of
Yes.
population?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's why I broke them out the way they did, is because each type of housing unit has a different population number.
Mhm.
So single-family houses, on average in the state, have 3.17 people per household, whereas when you get down into manufactured housing, it's 2.1, and apartments or 5+ units is 1.9. So it's important that we know what kind of stock we're building, because it will greatly vary the population that we need to plan for. So if we were to only build single-family residential, we would reach our 9,000 projection a lot faster than if we include some multifamily housing unit. It allows us to accommodate more people or more units without exceeding our population projection.
Is owner occupied any part of the,
It is not.
is there some statutory provision that would disallow that?
No, because I didn't factor that in because there's no readily available information. The Office of Financial Management just simply looks at housing type, not ownership.
But we as a planning commission can look at the difference?
We theoretically, you could ask me, that's part of the reason why we're here today, is I can redo some numbers based upon our census data, which is not necessarily as accurate because we're 8 years away from the last census. So I can tell you what our persons per household was back, in 80 and 90 and 2000 and 2010. But this information from the OFM is based upon annual input from the cities, and that's how they calculate the state population. So I can do that if you want me to, and we can compare the two numbers. So
I would just follow that up with this, the ratio that we have that is in our current comprehensive plan was set by the planning commission based on,
Public testimony and our
We had
best judgment and presentations of consultants.
the consultant, yeah.
the other thing that I did factor in here, and that is when I was doing my estimations for the calculation, low density housing, so essentially what I'm considering single family low density, is 4 units per acre. Our zoning actually allows up to 6 or 7 units per acre, but rather than trying to invent stuff based upon what I think is going to happen, I used the rule of thumb that was adopted by the Planning Commission because I want to compare oranges to oranges in different growth scenarios rather than trying to reinvent numbers. And then rather than arguing those things, I felt since the Planning Commission adopted 4 units per acre low density and 20 units per acre high density, that made sense. So our zoning allows 25 to 35 units per acre, but if the planning commission believes 20 is the number to use, I didn't want to mess with those for the sake of this discussion at this point. What we may find out by the time we're done all of the public input is we may need to go back and take a look at our comprehensive plan text and see and reevaluate those numbers.
For averages, those don't seem.
Sorry?
For averages, those don't seem too far out. Because they could be. I imagine there's going to be some development below those densities, as well as some over those densities.
So that's kind of my basic philosophy, and you'll notice when you get to scenario 3 and scenario 4, actually you see it better in scenario 5 and 6, and that is, let's go with scenario 6, because it's the whopping monster. But what you'll find is, I had mentioned when we were looking at the graphs, that scenario 6, 5, and 4 are all represented by that same line on the graph, and that's because we know that Woodland Commerce Center is within the city. We know that BLRV is within the city, and we know that Saxony Pacific is within the city. So those numbers haven't changed from my very first calculation, because they're likely to develop under growth scenario 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. But you're starting to notice that this list is considerably longer than this list, and then the scenario 4 list, which is just the applicants that are being considered, this one's even shorter. And that's because I'm assuming at some point Aho construction or the Aho project would come in phase, and they would do a subdivision at a time, and I assume maybe 50 acres a year, maybe 168 units per subdivision. And so project 2 and project 3 may get approved in a year, but it may take them 3 years to build. So in these scenarios, what you'll see is, you have single-family residential development, and then it continues on at a steady pace, and some years it goes up, and some years it goes down, based upon different projects coming online. And then you also have the multifamily in the background, apartments, condominiums, townhomes coming online, and they're really different products, and they're different applicants, so they may occur at the same time, or they may occur one after each other. But these are just kind of different models that allow us to kind of estimate, what's the end point for the city if this stuff were to happen. So, again, going back to scenario 6, my assumption is, the South Woodland area, the Swiss cheese that's in there, it has a potential of 566 additional units, but that includes a lot of critical areas. It includes a lot of land set aside for the dike. It includes a lot of land set aside for roads. And so right off the top, I'll take 60% off of the top. And that's the amount of units that could eventually be between here and the river south of us, on top of the units that I projected for Aho. So, lacking any better information, I just used my best professional judgment, looked at each individual piece and kind of assigned numbers so that we can take a look at what the scenario is. Now, what we may find is that there are only enough contractors out there looking for work that they can only build 50 houses a year. Or they might be able to build 200 a year, and 50 acres gets developed every year, and we get through our land supply a lot faster than projected, but that's something we would have to evaluate every 5 years under GMA. We're supposed to update our comprehensive plan. So the last 3 years have been considerable. The next 2 might dictate when we update our comprehensive plan. 2015 and 2020. And then I'm sorry, the other thing I forgot to mention, and that is scenario 6 includes all of the bottoms which is approximately 4,000 additional acres in our growth area. But I'm assuming at this point, because I've heard a lot of testimony from farmers and agricultural owners, that they're not going to develop, and hell no, they don't want that to occur. But, you know, from a port point of view, they might want to be in the urban growth area, even if the farmers don't. So I'm assuming no growth out there.
Through 2036?
Yeah.
Is that your horizon?
Through 2036. And so to convert that to the numbers, again, this is the same growth scenario from scenario 4 and scenario 5, where, you know, again, I'm accounting for the Quail homes, and I'm accounting for the multifamily apartments that we had talked about previously. So again, this is just kind of the standard growth scenario that helps us project how it could go for the next 20 years. And then each one of those, I point out at some point, we're going to have more single-family residential than what we expected. And at some point, we will either have unfulfilled multifamily or, based upon the projections, I'll have to move up or move down, at which point you can entertain multifamily rezones and comp plan amendments based upon where we are in the projections. So that's essentially it. Do you have any advice for me, comments, questions?
Just have one issue right now. I'm sure something later. Just kind of a point of clarification. When we're talking about a constant percentage growth every year, that's going to be exponential growth and not linear. Linear would be not a constant percentage, but a constant raw number. So it's growing by 2% every year. That growth, that raw number is actually going to go up year on year as well.
No.
And I think that's important for us to
Yeah,
consider as we're planning for this. I'll start with that.
Okay. Does anyone else on the commission have something they want to ask, or? I guess we could entertain some comments from anybody in the audience who wishes to comment.
It's okay, Mr. Mattson, I'll hold the slides.
I think we know, yeah.
Steve Madsen, Aho Construction, 5512 Northeast 109th Court, Vancouver, Washington, 98662. Mel Aho, Houston Aho are here with me as well to entertain any of the other questions you might have, since we're clearly the elephant in the room here. What I would like to just pass forward to Travis, and we're going to be submitting substantial comments as we go through the process to try to help inform everybody as to how this all proceeds. But for right now, what I'd like to hand over to Travis, which I hope he'll transmit to the Planning Commission, is the City of Ridgefield's growth percentages from 2011 through 2017. They start in 2011 at 5.12% growth. Currently in 2017, they experienced 13.04% growth. So I think what that informs you is that you can grow as fast as you want to grow in this environment. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else in the audience wish to come forward and make comments? Okay.
So we've talked about this just a little bit before. If anyone else wants anything?
Go ahead.
All right. We're talking about developing in the bottoms, which is in the Dyking district. There's currently modeling of projected peak river flows going on at the University of Washington for the Army Corps of Engineers and the USGS. And that research should be available within the next year. And from what I understand so far, peak flows are expected to go up fairly dramatically in the next 20 to 50 years. And I think that information seems pretty important when we're thinking about planning like this, especially for growth in the bottoms. The Columbia River has very little storage behind the dams, so increasing peak flows means more flooding. And I think it would be really foolish to not at least consider that. And that's probably not within most of our areas of expertise, but I do think it's really, really important.
So Travis, can you refresh the commission? We had someone come speak to us from the Dyking District, and I'm not discounting anything you're saying here, but it appeared that he was presenting information that that there would not be problems with the expected peak flows from the Columbia, and that they may have to update their pumps and add more pumps, but it would not be sufficient enough to impact the bottom. So can you just refresh me?
So I made the presentation to the Dyking District. I told them about this process coming up, and they had several comments. But the county engineering representative staff member for the Dyking District brought up several issues at their meeting, and that was that there are several things that are important to them to understand about this process. One of them is clearly just the simple selfish issue of the more development that the city creates, the more runoff there will be, so more impervious surfacing. Therefore, they need to be aware of that for ditch capacity and pump capacity and assets that they need to be aware of on their side of the fence. The issue of additional flood levels and stormwater was also implicit in that conversation, and so the Dyking District is aware that that issue has been raised, and as much as the Dyking District board members didn't necessarily have direct comments on that, part of their conversation in the future will be based upon the fact that they will have increasing amounts of runoff to deal with, and that at the same time they will have increasing responsibility and increasing funding base, so they will be getting more funding as the values within their district increase, and that with that comes more responsibility to look at the levees and the certification and the pumping infrastructure and the decking infrastructure. So they are part of this conversation, and that may not necessarily have been a direct result of that conversation, but I know at least on the staff side, they're starting to have that, think through that process.
Commissioner Jensen, do you know when the anticipated date for the release of that new data is?
I don't, unfortunately. I went to a presentation this week about projected unmanaged annual flow, which was sort of preliminary step in that ongoing research. It sounded like they were expecting to publish it this year.
Thank you.
So perhaps AHO's done has some information. I mean, their application for inclusion in the urban growth boundary, they're actually behind the dike. They're in a flood protection zone, whereas the majority of the city of Woodland housing is outside of the dike and is more prone to flooding because it is outside of the dike, except for the area of the old historical town. I don't want to guess, but I would think that that might be one of the factors as to why you selected the location that you did. I'd be interested if, there's any input on that, but certainly the area they're talking about is protected by dike. So,
Please come up.
I didn't sign it on it.
What- oh,
It's a question.
Yeah. Perhaps you could sign in afterwards, but
Yeah.
your name and
Mel
address,
Aho,
please.
Aho Construction, 5512, Northeast 109th Court. Vancouver, Washington, 98662. Certainly, sorry about clearing my throat here. Looking at the floodplain and all the properties I've looked at for several years, always looking and been invited to come look at a piece of property here, worked on a piece for several years. But with the floodplain moving up and down and the insurance and the other things, and to put that burden on a homeowner has pretty much deterred me from even looking at Woodland. This was one of the most attractive, well, I shouldn't say one, but it's certainly a portion and that you bring up, that it is protected in a dike zone. It is protected property. And I think it's much safer over there than it is anywhere that we have here. I did see the 96 flood. I've got property up the river. Yeah, I don't want nothing to do with that. I can see, so I think that the insurance or the FEMA and all the other stuff and trying to market that to people and have to put a disclaimer in your contract, and I believe you're in a real estate business, it isn't fun. I don't want to be involved in any of that kind of stuff. And I think so certainly makes it very attractive for that reason, to be protected and not be in a floodplain. So,
in an unprotected flood zone.
yes. Well, it's not considered floodplain at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
Because,
Mhm.
I had kind of a peripheral question that just came to my mind. So are there any special building requirements to build out there? I mean, like you can't put a basement in, or you can, or it wouldn't be advisable, or you have to build on.
I haven't thought that far through that because I don't try to get into the details till the concept develops fully and then then that'll all come out, But typically, I, as a builder, don't do basements. I wouldn't be involved in basements. We just don't. It's not a.
Doesn't seem to make sense. Right?
Typically, for the Northwest, it is not regardless of what property you're on. And even in real estate, if you got a hillside lot and you end up with a walkout basement or you end up with something else, but if you just end up with a cold cellar, you're better off adding another bay on your garage, okay? And the codes and all the other stuff to make those work, they just aren't. And, in the Midwest where there's tornadoes and shelters and you have to bring everything in for the winter and certain things, the climate, and there's it's not something, and it's not a market that I'm even considering in the feasibility of this project and the targeted people that I'd look at. So I'll probably open my mouth to something there that I hope would spur a better question.
Change your mind.
No. So, no, I don't see anything in that situation at this point.
Yeah.
And find the FEMA maps, this is a Zone X, which is a 500-year flood, and they are not required to do any kind of special building standards in the 500-year flood.
Okay, yeah. I guess.
And thank you, and you spurred another thing. It would be, if the engineering or it was required that you had to do wider footings, let's say the soil didn't reach what we thought would be, then it would be rebar or different reinforcements, or that would be come through either through the county or who would be overlaying it. Okay. So,
Thank you.
any other question?
Travis, what about water table issues?
So again, that would be an individual construction responsibility, and they would need to take a look at if they had to do engineered foundations because of soils that would be looked at the subdivision level, and the individual builder would be responsible for meeting the standards. Yeah, so we will consider those as part of the subdivision process.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other comments, questions? So, what do you need from us?
So if you think I'm on the right track and you think that I've got enough detail here to go out to the public and seek input, I don't know if you necessarily want to dive into each individual project and how I arrived at those numbers, or whether you think it gives at least some meat to the bone and you want to go out and see what the public thinks. And
When are you projecting starting the open houses?
So I have a preliminary schedule developed, and I would start doing open houses, and I think one of the dates would be we would have an open house session in November at your next regularly scheduled hearing. But we also have a binding site plan hearing and that's November 15th. So we would do an open house prior to the hearing itself, and then moving to the public hearing for the binding site plan. But I've developed kind of a preliminary schedule for when I have open houses, and I've tried to do a couple during the day and a couple in the evening,
Correct.
so that way I'm trying to catch people different times of the day with different availability. And then actually, kind of, if you're going to give me the go-ahead, then we should probably do a quick executive session and talk about when you would like to hear the actual cases. Because once you kind of give me this growth scenario, then I will start to do the individual analysis for the individual applications. And you're going to need a recommendation, not only kind of which growth scenario you think best suits the city's needs, but then we'll take a look at the individual applications, and you'll have to make a recommendation to the city council as to which applications should be considered and
I think the attorney wants to say something.
Yes, if I can. I mean, I was the one that requested the executive session because there's potential litigation involved in this process. And so after we finish the public hearing, I wanted just to sit down and have an executive session, both for me to sort of express some of my concerns and also hear feedback where we all would like to go.
I'm kind of interested in, before we wrap up, like, do we envision, and this is, probably beyond our planning horizon, but, like, do we envision in some of these scenarios, like, filling the entire bottoms and then what? Like, where does it stop? So, and that's a little bit what I was thinking about when we were talking about exponential growth. Like, exponential growth is faster every year and never stops, and which is, we know that can't go on forever. So I'm wondering if we're thinking about any limit to this. And
so I think that's part of the reason why we're having this discussion about which scenario we think is realistic. And I'm sorry, I don't seem to have the different scenarios. I have paper copies of those maps if you want here, and I can walk through those with you. The assumption on my part is that the comprehensive plan will be reviewed every few years to figure out. And then also, as we started to have a conversation about residential densities and tools that are available in our tool belt, ultimately the fact that they are in the urban growth area, and we are going to then kind of reverse engineer the question of, do we have enough water? Do we have enough sewer? Do we have enough transportation capacity? And at what point do we need to start building additional water towers, additional sewer plant capacity, additional road, or another interchange on the highway? We could take a look at those two ways. Are we going to need it in 3 years, or are we going to need it in 500 additional houses. Because 500 additional houses, it might be one building season, or it might be 10 building seasons, depending on what the market determines, how quickly the city needs to have its financial house in order to fund those issues. And so,
Well, I think potentially like a third approach to it would be how much water tower do we want? How much sewage treatment plant do we want? And how much population will that support?
So, how much do we plan for? Then the next question, of course, is when it gets built, but also the long-term potential for the city to annex all of that land versus what makes the most sense. Like, do we want to be serving single-family residential lots that are in the county, like, for example, north of the city, north of Green Mountain Road? Do we want to be giving them water but not approving comprehensive plan amendments within the city that's already in our service area? Those are all important questions that ultimately are going to be annexation questions, not necessarily planning, long-term planning questions.
I think we're also. It seems like we're also sort of focusing on predicting what kind of growth is going to happen, rather than both either how much growth we want or why we want growth. It seems like neither of those things have really come up and seem clear to me. And that's probably not a discussion for tonight, but it seems like we're just sort of taking for granted that this is going to happen. We're just trying to figure out how much of it.
But Travis, isn't it part of this that you're going to go through this exercise with these scenarios and give public comment, public testimony that will help then guide the process, and then it comes back? So, I mean, this isn't just, this is a process to evaluate. We're at the beginning stages of this, in my estimation.
Yeah, absolutely. I just haven't heard those things.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but to answer that specific question, yes, my assumption is that I am here to process permits, and ultimately the growth from a planner point of view, it's inevitable. I need to be prepared to manage it properly. That's the whole second part of this discussion. The next 3 years are going to be telling when we update codes and update zoning maps and do annexations. That's all why I'm here. But what growth scenario you want me to prepare the city for, that's entirely the direction that I see it.
Correct. Now, are you gonna be prepared to address financial impact on taxpayers, or, I mean, that's gonna be, you're gonna get that.
So I will do my best to be prepared for that question, but what I have partly tried to do is I've tried to compartmentalize what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to have a strictly map discussion, because we just went through a large public process to update the comprehensive plan just a couple of years ago. I don't need to reproduce that effort, because it looks like the rest of the document seems to be adequate and it met growth management standards. The part I'm trying to come back and explore is the question of what does the map look like, so now I have something to apply those policies and growth assumptions to. Because under scenarios 1 and 2, we can kick this can down the road 3 or 4 years and there'll still be construction, but at some point, I'll have applicants who are knocking at the door saying, okay, you haven't built a house in 6 months, there's no more land left to build, we need to review this question.
Just as from a philosophical point of view, why is there an imperative that you allow that?
Why is there?
I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. I'm just saying where does the imperative come from that if somebody wants to build something, you should. No, not yet. Please. I'd prefer to hear from Travis first. Thank you.
Yeah, and so I had mentioned this last month when we were here, and that is scenarios 2 and 3. I mean, they both provide several years worth of let's wait and see what happens. The one thing that I hadn't fully prepared and didn't have to show you at that meeting was what's happened since this comp plan was adopted is this number right here. So since 2015, when the initial calculations were made, and the comp plan was adopted in 2016. So they expected 673 additional single-family residential and 619 additional multi-family. What's happened since that time is, for some magical reason, when I got the Office of Financial Management numbers for 2018, we have almost 400 units more residential dwelling units in the city than we did in 2014-15. And I don't see the building permit data that supports that, but it may be that they were using the 2012 numbers, not the 2015 numbers, which means we're already 400 units behind the curve because our plan is already 400 units behind the calculation scenario. So when I'm looking and trying to figure out, okay, in the next year, if we're going to build another 60 units next year, it's just starting to get more of a disconnect between what we thought was going to happen and what's really happening. I'm trying to close the gap between what I can expect to happen versus what has already happened. There's already seems to be this wild disconnect between the map I was handed and the data that I've been handed. I ended up with 6 crazy scenarios.
I kind of hear what you're saying, because you're kind of saying, well, I'm not sure what you're saying, but I'll say what I'm going to say. How's that?
Seems you're on more solid ground.
I'll try to say what I'm going to say. I don't really understand, any of this, to tell you the truth. All these projections about population growth and all this kind of stuff. I mean, and why that would even enter our thinking. To me, it's a question of what are the benefits for the town and what are the liabilities for the town, okay, moving forward. And I think those are the questions that really need to be addressed. But I guess it's okay to have all these, we're going to have this plan. But what if we decide we don't want any more population growth here?
Well, you'll hear that in a public hearing.
I know, but is that like untenable or something?
I mean,
I'm not saying I want that.
I mean, yeah. To your point, though, like that is just a physical eventuality, right? It can't grow forever. Woodland can't grow forever. So somebody at some point is going to have to decide, this is how much is possible to happen. Right? So whether we want to do that or not is a different matter. But somebody's going to have to.
I guess what I mean is, like, some of this development, I think, probably is a good idea, because maybe it's going to bring more money to the town or increase, some of the services we have and things like that. And then on the other side, there's maybe some liabilities because we have to build more schools or do this or do that.
That's not far off from us.
Yeah, I guess. So, is there some way maybe we need to change the focus a little bit from this population? Maybe right now, at this time, maybe is not a good time to hash that out, but I'm saying, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. So I
I think it's
exactly
good you
what you're
have
saying,
these
'cause
numbers.
Because you're saying something very similar to what Tel is getting at, and that is it a foregone conclusion that we're going to grow? And the answer to that is no. In some ways, I should say, it is no. Because looking at scenario one, for example, it assumes that we're going to grow over the next few years because there's land available to grow. But that doesn't assume, or that doesn't necessarily need to assume, that we're going to expand the growth area and therefore we will have additional land to grow beyond. That's what these two scenarios represent, is we build out the land that we have and then our population stagnates until somebody redevelops or we adopt additional accessory dwelling units, or we allow for mother-in-law apartments and people start to, put in apartments above the garage, or we start getting, some older houses on big lots torn down and replaced with duplexes or threeplexes or apartment buildings. That's entirely possible, and scenarios like number one will make that more likely. But from my point of view, part of my job is to figure out, okay, what kind of capacities and what kind of growth pressures are we going to have? When do we need additional water and sewer? And at some point, we're going to need expansion of our water system. Should I assume that there's going to be 2,200 houses to pay for that? Or should I assume there's going to be 4,200 houses to pay for that? Because if we don't need it for 20 years, then 2,200 houses I can collect, extra $5 a month, and in 20 years I'll have enough money saved up that we can do the expansion. But if the population under these different scenarios grows, I need to collect a lot more than $5 a month from the individual homeowners. We need to be prepared for that scenario as well. So I can do the calculations that you're talking about, figure out the financial impacts of that growth. It's just going to be scenario one and scenario two, where we don't expand our growth boundary. I don't need to worry about additional pipes and roads, and I just need to worry about pump station upgrades, which is a totally different price than actual installing new stations, new pipes.
Don't get me wrong, I'm glad you did all this stuff. I'm just saying, from my point of view, I'm kind of more interested in what kind of town do we want to live in? And where do we want the town to go? I mean, do we want to be in Beaverton in 10, 20 years, or do we want to be in, I guess that's what I'm saying, but and that's why I'm a little confused. How do we get there? How do we,
You get there by going through this process. For example, have you been downtown to our old town and seen all the buildings that need repair? And it'd be nice to bring businesses in to upgrade the town, get more money, more tax revenue. And part of the way you do that is by making the town more attractive by selected growth, metered growth, and then we do have this opportunity to decide what type of town and growth we want. But if you look at our downtown and what it could be if we had more revenue to do more things, and we used our available land wisely and in a measured way, that's how we get to there. We have to go through this process and hear what the citizens think on these issues. But, it's a double-edged sword. But I think there are real-life examples in Woodland that we could make things better, make Woodland more economically viable by addressing these issues.
I think that, the other point that, we talked about at the last meeting was that some of these projects could move forward without annexation to the city, and that we have large tracts of land outside city limits that are already in our school district, that are already using our facilities and using our freeways and using our stores and that are outside the city limits, and probably there are more individual single-family platted lots in the pipeline within our school district than we're talking about adding on the growth chart that you have. And So we can certainly continue to say we don't want to grow, we want to continue to be stagnant, or we can face the fact that we can say we don't want the Woodland Bottoms to change and become more industrialized or more residential focused, but the folks that live there control what's happening to their land, and the folks that live in that particular area have made overtures to the city that they intend to not continue to use the land the way that they have historically. So it's our opportunity to work with those people and to focus how we want that growth to occur. We can turn our backs on them. That does not mean that it will not develop. And I don't know that that might not be what Steve was going to bring to us from his perspective, but there's tremendous growth going on around us. We're talking about focusing that growth and causing more multifamily to perhaps be at the core area. It's an opportunity for us to focus on parks and trails and recreational facilities and what type of growth we want to see, or letting it happen helter-skelter. I always use Texas as a wonderful opportunity because everyone thinks they develop helter-skelter, and yet it's a wonderful planned state when you're there, because developers just go outside the regulatory agencies and build Disneylands. And they work perfectly, and people move to them, and industry moves to them. So, I think it's an opportunity to work with these people. It doesn't mean we have to let them do whatever they want, but it is an opportunity to listen to them. And, I keep saying, why aren't we talking to the people in Clark County? Why aren't we asking people in Clark County, do you want to be a part of this process and increase our urban growth boundaries there? I think the Loomis application seems frivolous. However, there's a water issue up Green Mountain Road that many of us are aware of. It used to be that the city would furnish water outside city limits. We no longer do. I don't know if we do that because of the State Board of Health, or if that was something we did to force annexation. It should be something as a planning commission that we should be looking at. If those neighbors want to build a water tower and we have capacity, why aren't we furnishing them water? So that's a code we should look at. But I understand what this, do we want to grow? Do we want to change? We will change, but we may be an island in the middle of change. But it is happening regardless of how we want to say it's going to happen. At least that's my position. But I don't have an exact number today. Scott might be able to help me better. But I would say, are there 1,000 lots in the pipeline in rural Cowlitz County in Southwest Washington? 1,500 maybe? I mean, it's tremendous growth going on outside city limits because there is not land available inside city limits for a variety of reasons and a variety of pocketbooks of purchasers. So Mel's an expert. I just dabble in it.
Mr. Perry, did you want to make?
Scott Perry, 180 South Pekin here in Woodland. I just want to give you an example of what happens when you decide you don't want to do something. I was on the city council when we were planning the comprehensive plan. One of the things that was discussed at some length was expanding the urban growth boundary to the south. And it was decided, no, we don't need that. So as soon as we passed the comprehensive plan, Cowlitz County came down and decided we're going to make that an industrial area. I don't know if you've considered that or not, but they did. The farmers and so forth and property owners down there stood up and fought against it, and now I think they call it, small farm holdings or something like that, and you can build on 5 acres and so forth, where that was 38 acres before. So when you say you're not going to do it, people like Aho and so forth come in. There's the benefit to the county, there's the benefit to the state. and so forth. And so then they get involved and they'll see that it gets done.
Thank you. I'm not, don't get me wrong, I'm not opposed to growth. And I really appreciate what you said about the growth in the south. And so what scenario is that where we would annex that southern portion?
So either it could be scenario 3, 4, or 5. So scenario 3 means that some of the dark greens, you'd have to figure out, based upon my analysis, where you think the line should be drawn, and you're gonna have some winners and some losers south of town. Scenario 4 assumes that you're going to take them into the growth boundary, but it's gonna be a really funky line. Scenario 5 is everything south of town and east of the train tracks. So it assumes that we're gonna plan for the people who aren't necessarily here at the table for this discussion.
Like the green area right there.
Yep. So
So,
this is actually the scenario 5
Right.
map,
and the number 6 was the whole potatoes.
everything.
So maybe at this point, given the opposition of the agricultural people and everything, and the pressures of seems to me that scenario 5 is starting to make the most sense to me. As far as, and I don't, anybody else have any comments?
Well, once again, we're in the process of doing this, and we don't have to decide tonight on which scenario we're
Right.
looking at.
Well, I don't think we should decide. We have to hear public testimony.
Right, yeah.
We have to base things on what we hear. We can't, we don't make unilateral decisions. We listen to public testimony and we make recommendations.
Yeah, it's the council that makes the unilateral decisions.
But-
Yeah, but, well, they listen to testimony too, so. But,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
so
mean,
we
I
have
would-
these open houses. We're going to try and get some more input and, before we decide, or before we recommend.
Responding to what June was saying about growth happening in the community, part of it or not, I think it's definitely true. But folks aren't asking to be annexed into the city or added to the urban growth boundary, out of goodwill towards the city. It's about their self-interest, which we should absolutely expect, right? And there are advantages and disadvantages to both. If they grow without being part of the city, we're not on the hook for their infrastructure. We don't get their tax revenue, so that's the downside. We do get the tax revenue from sales tax, which is a huge part of our budget. So how that balances out, I think that's something we should talk about. And yeah, it could come down either way, obviously. But it's not. I don't think it's an issue of we ignore it and we just get run over, or we accept it and we reap all these benefits. I don't think it's as simple as that.
No, I agree. It's a process of focusing it.
And I do have an update for you, June. We talked to Clark County Community Planning, and their staff came down and met with Tracy and I. And Clark County does not have any of their community vision document, does not include expansion of the city of Woodland into Clark County. We, however, agreed that it made sense for us to be part of that discussion because they are going to be updating that document in the next year or two. And then after that will be a comprehensive plan update, which means that we have a couple years of groundwork before they have their comp plan discussion. So they will essentially establish a footprint, at which point the planning commission and the city council would be able to consider expansion of the growth area into Clark County, but it's going to take a couple of years and a couple of planning processes on the county's part before they can create a footprint for us to start considering expansion into Clark County. So I did catch that comment.
Okay, thank you.
We made it last meeting and we've made progress.
Okay.
So we're
Which would include
Say
the
more than
inside
4
of the
years.
lake,
Yeah.
which is a big recreational piece, potential recreational piece.
So if the city annexed that whole area instead of doing some kind of piecemeal, whatever, scenario 3, scenario 4, okay, so if we just annex the whole thing, does that mean we have to give everybody permits to build there and anything
So-
goes, or?
So we're actually talking about the comprehensive plan and the urban growth area map. So annexation wouldn't actually occur until they come up with the development application and make a proposal. So at this point, we're just going to make sure that we have enough water and sewer and road available, road capacity, and they will be responsible for actually doing the installation of the pipes and the installation of the roads and on a project-by-project basis.
I guess my concern is, and June pointed it out, that the
Thank you.
development's gonna happen anyway,
Not?
probably, or it's gonna be in the hands of the county, and wouldn't we rather have it in the hands of the town? Since all those people are gonna be driving through, to get, everybody in the bottoms has to go through Woodland to get out of there. And they have, in and out. I mean, there's no other way to get in and out of that whole parcel of land except for going through the town of Woodland.
Right, so currently that is, a limit on growth, right? Like, so, there again, like, there's only so much of that is gonna be tolerated, and it's gonna become very difficult for somebody to sell a home. No one can leave before.
The,
Yes, that certainly stopped growth in Seattle.
the problem that I see is that if the county can start giving people permits to start building houses out there, and the town doesn't have anything to say about it, and the fact that all these people are going to impact the town very severely, that to me is a downside for the people in the town. That I
It's an
think.
impact.
Huh?
It's an impact.
Yeah, but and the notion that we don't have anything to say about it because it's not in our urban growth boundary, I think is a problem. I think that we need to, especially because of the entry and exit. There's no entry or exit except through Woodland. So we really need to. It's in the best interest of the people of the town to control that and have some say about what happens there. I'm not saying no development, or I'm just saying we should be the ones who have a say. Where we need some parks, we need some trails, we need some schools, we need some houses, we need whatever, right down the road. So. And so it doesn't make sense to me to do some kind of piecemeal thing down there. Because their growth is coming, the area is changing, and I'd rather see the town control it than the county, I guess.
It seems reasonable. Here again, it's a long-term discussion.
Well,
We
and
need to make appointments.
I don't want to act like I am favorable to their application, even though they're very nice guys and they've been good to Woodland. That may not be where we decide we want our growth. We may decide we want it someplace else. Maybe we want it upriver, maybe we want it on the other side of the bottoms. Maybe we don't want it there. I'm just saying, if we don't allow and focus our growth inside the city limits, it will happen around us. And I can't remember what the plat is on Benno's property, but is it 32 units? I think is already pretty much done, and is it 36 units? And I think the comp plan now allows for 2-acre units down there, 2.5-acre units. Is it small 5 still? So it could be pretty dense down there, and they'd wave at us as they went by.
It's also
Mhm. Yeah.
So does what I'm saying make sense to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, personally, I find it much easier to get a development permit out of Cowlitz County than out of the city of Woodland.
But I'd like to, can I comment a little bit?
Sure.
She'd like you to come up to the microphone, yeah.
It's really, really hard to hear when I go back and review it. Really hard.
There's one that the question's going around council tonight, and I was a little taken back by it in a sense, because there's a document called the Growth Management Act, okay? And knowing when you read that document, if you agree to be a city that is in the Growth Management Act, you carry a level of responsibility to that act. And I was assuming that, okay? So I really wasn't prepared for the thought that we're a board, we do whatever we want. Then I kind of understood saying, well, maybe Travis's numbers don't mean nothing, because in order to expand the growth, your boundaries, you have to be in compliance with the document. And one of the greatest things that I see in the document is a developer. I'd always fight that. The last 30, 40, whatever years, when they started it in 81 or whatever it did. 78, I think they started proposing it for the state. Well, it was like everybody quoted what piece they wanted out of it. But if you read the document, it's actually a pretty good document. And one of the greatest things about that document is the responsibility of any city has to manage their growth. And they have a big responsibility to provide an ample source of available lands and affordable lands. So you don't just want to head out to Green Mountain or Blue Mountain or whatever you're going to, okay? We're going to go to what would provide growth and manage that. That's why I'm here, because it's an opportunity. You have to make the numbers work on Travis's side. It's an opportunity to provide some good, solid, affordable growth. And that's the environment I've seen and made those choices with the landowners, and looking at the climate of the farm and the pressures that are on them and what they're willing to do and want to do. It's a great opportunity for me as a builder to provide. I know my houses aren't near as affordable as they used to be, because with regulations and land and things, and by the time you pay for that land, you can't just get away with not putting that much more in the house. It's put to the point where affordability has become a moratorium in and of itself, okay? And we see interest rates starting to go. Those are dollars that don't go near as far. Those put a lot of pressures and a lot of other problems that when you try and meet your growth management and the people can't afford the rent and the other pressures that you have, and the good that it does to a community that I've seen in the past 40 years of my own life in this business, that when you can provide somebody with affordable ownership, that provides your community a lot more than you can think of, okay? It used to be the old professional used to come out from 50 miles away with the slide and say, for every dollar you spend in industrial, you get $1.60 back. But for every dollar that you're missing on the affordable side of housing, when you start multiplying the crime and everything else that goes with that, and your community, I don't think you can even put a dollar number on it. So that's kind of the balance that I'd like to put, the perspective that I see, is that as a GMA city, we don't have the growth to take this whole thing and annex it in. It has to actually develop out there in that, and to provide the services and then annex. And one of the key points was that typically, I know Travis has worked in Clark County before. This is something we did in Clark County for years. We signed an annexation letter when we took the services of the water, that we wouldn't protest or argue about any annexation. They knew by providing that they would go to the city when they had the other portion of their requirements met by GMA. So That's how it would be. It's a management of growth, proper growth, and I wish we could look at it in that perspective. And I'm not trying to say how growth should go or anything, but I do believe there's a great opportunity to manage growth for the city of Woodland that could be done for years. And to me, small town is hard to keep up. And I've got a little adage, is show me something that's not growing, and that goal line isn't, and I'll show you something that's dead, okay? And there is a great opportunity to grow properly, and that's what I'd
One
like.
question
Yeah,
for
go
you.
ahead.
Okay, so, I know Steve's mentioned about having it remain in Cowles County and then doing the annexation letter, et cetera. But, under that scenario, who upgrades the roads? Does Cowles County?
Oh, that's a good question, because these are things that should have been, I mean, yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because we met with the city of, with Cowles County, and they were in agreement that they would like this property to go to the city of Woodland. So all of the approval would be done if we were so fortunate as to get something this happen, that the approval would be done according to city standards, even though it be in the county, so that there would be no difference in how things would be done. So your street widths and everything would be in compliance.
Who is paying for these street improvements?
It would be just like the normal situation. If I was developing it, I would be paying for all of that,
Okay.
and
it
then,
would meet Woodland standards.
and it would meet Woodland standard.
That's what paying
Yeah.
taxes were.
And then, but whatever hurdles there would be, and there's sometimes if there's more off-site than you need to get something done, then there'd be latecomers for possibly, or whatever there may be. And there's some things, if there's some things that maybe be a capital facilities fund, I don't know what interchange may need to be that would be bigger than the project itself, that there would be other agreements have to be made separately and sidelights, but, okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that, but
No, that's
thank
great.
you. Thank you for giving me the floor.
Can I ask you?
Yes.
Okay, see, we're trying, I guess we're gonna do some kind of public process of which
Mhm.
scenario, and we've got all these scenarios. Have you reviewed these scenarios at all? I guess it's 3, 4, and 5. I mean, I'm talking about developing that southern part.
Yes,
Which makes more sense?
You know, I haven't looked at them in great detail, but obviously, my eyes are going to be focused on what I've made verbal commitments to if this, and this happens. I like the scenario about just taken, because it's mentioned, the farmers to the west of the railroad tracks, they're little or likely. The biggest advantage I saw is bringing that in is for the port benefit to generate the dollars for the continued industry and the industrial lands. That would be great if there was actually dollars come in that would actually fix a major transportation issue. But outside of that, I think that this, and then I do know, obviously, I have a plan in my mind if I could meet this, and this. It's, there's an old something adage says what you can believe or conceive or believe you can achieve. Well, I could see this scenario being achievable without any opposition from that particular area. Okay, that was one of the biggest things, and it seems manageable and achievable, and everything that's around. Pardon?
Scenario 5.
Whatever it is. Okay. Scenario 5 looks best on that situation. The rest of it's just way too big of a stretch to probably document with your growth and to put into line. I think it's there, and then it's really more smoke and mirrors than reality. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to-
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're gonna plan, then best to plan the whole, maybe some of it, in the planning, some of it doesn't get developed. I don't
That's
know.
always
I'm
the
not
way it
saying
is.
that
Okay.
I want every square, I would say, but it's,
Yeah.
from a planning point of view, it seems to make sense to go after the whole.
From my perspective, I've never seen a more ideal situation. Okay, and I've been at it for a long time, worked at a lot of small cities and doubled their populations and different things like that. And and Moxie being one of them, and Quincy another, and even in Pasco haven't exactly doubled it, but I've raised a lot of growth and brought a growth in the community, and it's brought a lot of jobs and a lot of growth. Okay, so it's something familiar with in that respect, but I've never seen nothing that's exactly perfect. Okay, there's not two snowflakes alike. Okay, so.
Kind of like a blank slate out there in a way, you know, that, maybe if it's managed correctly,
And I think it can be.
listening to myself talking. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
for that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Executive session now? Okay.
So if you want to maybe take a break and then.
So, take a break.
What, I mean, what I'd recommend is, I don't know how long of a break you want, but then we can go into executive session. Then, since this is a regular meeting, we would, what I'm guessing for an executive session is maybe about 30 minutes. And then after that, come back and finish up with the business, and it's just adjourned.
So do,
We have left as a staff reports basically,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure how to have a technical glitch to try to stop and start recording.
Oh, I got you. You have to keep running it.
I'd have to be able to figure out how to start recording.
Okay, well, I mean, like I said, I'm guessing that probably we will need 30 minutes for the executive session.
so do we feel we need a break?
I'm ready to press on.
I don't.
I'd like a 5-minute break.
Okay, okay.
Sir, did we decide we're having a public hearing?
We're having an
Executive session?
We're having an executive session.
So
No, no, no.
we're ending the
Did we
public-
decide we're having a public open house on 11:15 before the meeting? Did we finish this conversation?
I did, he has it planned. I don't know that we need to.
Do we need to tell him yes?
I don't think so.
I think that's just a department.
So just for the record, we'll take a break until 8:45. We'll go into an executive session, and then we'll plan on coming out at 9:15, if that's okay with you.
Fine.
So we will continue to record, so anything you say will be caught on tape.
Yes.
And it will be public record.
So it's going to be on YouTube?
Yes.
We're being recorded, I guess.
So, the far end where they're talking, so the little section on the round where she goes where the park is,
You know
inside the
what my
way
guess is?
is actually Clark County.
Yeah, I know that. That was, you said you lived in Clark County.
And, so, but a portion of it's inside the city limits, but the majority of it isn't outside the city limits. So we have no say over it. I'm like, that's bad.
Yeah.
And even across the roof there where we have that new park, St. Clair Campus now, but we own, the city owns it.
Oh, so we should include that too. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and those mobile homes that are over there, those mobile home park, I mean, go grab it.
Well, that's okay. So I mean, you know,
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's issues, I mean, the transportation is a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
And schools and using the ground wisely. And, you know, I'm like, we should force the density into the core area and not have high density on the outside
Well,
edges.
that's all gonna be figured out, but
Yeah.
at this point, I think.
And frankly, I'd love to see it be small farms on acres down there. I think that sounds bucolic.
Where?
Down there on the end. I mean, I'd love if the density was higher down there, but that probably won't happen.
Well, can't people do mixed use things, like some of this and some of that? You know, I don't know. I mean, those are more specific type of questions.
Well, that's all in the fine tuning
Yeah.
of the zoning.
Yeah.
So we could say, oh, here we want you to do 4 houses on 5 acres. per acre, and here we want you to do 3 houses on it. I mean, the density is what it gets into. Because like he says, there's tons of wetlands and shorelines down there, but that doesn't affect density. So you can have 10 acres, and a whole bunch of it over here is in a shoreline, and you can't build in it, but you can move all the density over onto the area that is buildable. So then you could smash little tiny houses, and it's kind of like Sequoia Parkway. Those are all single-family residential occupancies. So why aren't we counting it? Why are we counting it as high? I mean, it's single-family, but is it single-family or is it high density? And I'm like, you know, like if you're living in a condominium, are we counting that as high density, or are we counting it as single-family residential? And I'm like, you know, who's living where? But I mean, you go outside city limits, and there's just, it's ridiculous. You know, you go up these little tiny logging roads, and there's 10 houses. And I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
I have an invitation. Can I throw it out?
Sure.
York League has invited us to come for a tour of his facility so that we could get some on the ground.
Who does? Oh, sorry?
York League, Columbia River Apartments has
okay.
asked me to tender to the planning commission an invitation at a time of our choosing that we would come. He would provide hard hats and give him a tour of the facility. He thinks it would be very helpful for us to see what goes on physically from a development standpoint, to get us educated about what it costs to build a road and a street, and what the infrastructure provisions are that we're putting on development in the industrial zone. It would lead us, I mean, I was fascinated to see the dewatering that they're doing to install sewer lines. It's pretty fascinating. So it's just an invitation. We can talk about it another time, but I wanted to get it out there.
Who is responding to you? Or is it?
I don't know, Travis can
I
respond.
make a motion that we have to figure out time for us.
Well, okay, no.
As long as
We-
there's 2 of you or less at one of those tours, that would be fine. But if 3 of you go, it has to be.
Oh, it's a quorum thing, okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you can call
Let's
them
just
at
do it
any time and
individually.
do a tour.
Oh,
Okay, so it's up to your individual discretion here, okay.
So I'm going to second that motion to adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion seconded to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. So we are adjourned at 9:35.